Oh, yeah. Bacon before the sermon could make it kind of a long sermon, couldn't it? There are times where God asks people to speak his message. And then there are other times when God asks people to write his message. Hosea is a little different because in Hosea, God wanted Hosea to live the message. And it's not just like a proclamation, it's like a summons. And for Hosea, his marital status, need a little help there, Travis. His marital status is going to become what God uses to speak his message to the world. God's going to ask Hosea to live something that others might be able to preach, and they might be able to describe. But God's going to ask Hosea to live through the vulnerability of his heart. And through the life of a Hosea, God is going to show how his divine faithfulness unfolds for his people. I just think about Hosea, every conversation that he would have with his wife, every sleepless night of anguish, every choice he would make to forgive, every one of those choices become a sermon that Scripture combines. Hosea is not going to speak about love. Hosea is going to live the covenant love that God has for his people. What God asked Hosea to do, for most Christians, it would seem almost unfathomable that God would even ask one of his prophets to do such a thing. But God comes to Hosea and he says, go marry a prostitute and have children of prostitution, because the land commits flagrant prostitution, forsaking the Lord. So he is going to use Hosea's marriage as an object lesson of how he is faithful to his people. So Hosea is going to go through the pain, the betrayal, the ache of unfaithfulness. So Hosea goes out and he marries Gomer. And Hosea and Gomer, sorry about that, become parents to 3 children. That's funny. And each birth brings this message from God. The first one is called Jezreel. And you look at Jezreel and you think, well, why would God name the first son Jezreel? And Jezreel is one of those places in the Bible where it carries the memory of bloodshed. It's where wars had been fought in the valley of Jezreel. And the valley of Jezreel also is one of those times in Old Testament history, we're not going to get too deep into that, where justice has been perverted. So Jezreel is one of those places that brings conflict and war and injustice to mind. But even in the injustice of Jezreel, there's also this hope that God inserts in there, because Jezreel means God sows. It means God will bring blessing. It means God will bring abundance. God's going to sow his seed there. So even in that wrath, he brings this idea of divine hope that's going to happen through what he is going to do for his people. Give birth to a daughter. So name the daughter Lo Ruhamah. Lo Ruhamah is just a combination of Hebrew words, and it means, you'll see it translated a different way. It can mean not loved. It could mean no compassion. It could mean no mercy. It could mean no kindness. And what God is illustrating through the birth of that daughter is that he is going to withdraw his compassion. Just think about that little girl with that name, and that just reminds him of that temporary removal of divine tenderness. But even in that, there's this shadow of hope, because he says the people who are called Lo Ruhamah, not loved, or not having compassion, or not showing mercy, they will be called having mercy and having compassion. So even in that, God is bringing hope. He brings up another son. And the third son is called Lo-Ami, and names have significance. And Lo-Ami means very literally, not my people. Maybe the worst one of all for them to hear. Because people who had prided themselves on being the people of God and God's special people and the people who were separated the world because God had called them out, God said, I'm now going to call you not my people because you've rebelled against me and you've forsaken me and you've turned to Baals and you've turned to other gods and you've turned to other things. So you think about that boy that grew up with that name of abandonment. But even in that desperation, God says, those who are going to be called not my people, they are going to be called my people. So even as God is proclaiming this judgment and illustrated through this life of Hosea, even in that, God's providing hope. In Hosea, as he says, they're going to be called not my people. He says, yes, the Israelites will be like the sand of the seashore, which cannot be measured or counted. In the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, they will be called sons of the living God. I will plant her for myself in the land. And there's this wordplay that sometimes in English you can't see in translations, but I will plant them. You remember the first son, what was his name? Jezreel, God sows or God plants. So there's a wordplay going on there. I will plant her for myself in the land, and I will show my love to the one I called not my loved one. I will say to those called not my people, you are my people, and they will say, my God. So God calls Hosea into this object lesson, where Hosea's broken marriage becomes the earthly reflection of God's broken heart. Even after marrying Gomer and the birth of the 3 children, evidently Gomer leaves again. And she goes to another man, to another person. It's very interesting in the text. We really struggle with what to do there. And one way it says that she's loved by a friend. So maybe it wasn't even somebody who was like an acquaintance. Maybe it was somebody to Hosea who was a very close friend, and it was that unfaithfulness. But God comes to him and he says, go find her again. And even though she's your wife, he goes back and he buys her back. And he brings her back home. So time after time, God is giving this message. So Hosea, he kind of witnesses this woman that he cherishes and her devotion. She leaves him for another. There's that sacred, it's kind of like this anguish. So God's using Hosea to say, look, I love you like a husband loves his wife, but you've not loved me. You've gone after something else. You've decided that you want to be married to another. You've decided that you don't want to be my people, that you don't want to be my wife. Now, we read that and we think, Greg, that's a lot of language to use kind of in a sermon. You're using words like prostitute and being a harlot and adultery. And yes. And that's the message God's trying to get across. He's not trying to challenge our sensibilities. He's not trying to challenge our comfort. He's just trying to unveil the deepness of his covenant love. That even when we choose to go chase something else, when we choose to go live with another, when we give our hearts to something else, that he still loves us and he doesn't give up on us. And so God says, my heart is broken. My heart's broken because I called you to be my people, but you've chosen to be something else. You haven't been faithful to me. You haven't returned my love. Every choice that they made was just a glimpse into the divine character of who they were. So covenant unfaithfulness involves choosing something or someone other than God for love and loyalty. And that gets some really tough questions that you have to sit in that chair and answer for yourself. God's people giving their hearts to something that ultimately is going to destroy them. God's trying to bring them life, and they turn to something else that's going to bring them death. God shows up in our lives. He gives us the gift of Christ. He's trying to bring us into life, but in his bringing us into life, we have a choice, and we choose to go into something that takes us into death. That other may be the one that the friend, if that's the right way to translate that word in Hosea chapter 2, maybe that other is something that's close to us or some person that's close to us. But it's about the pursuit and the pursuit of relationship. You know, and most human agreements work on the idea of contractual logic. Now, I really struggled with how to explain that. I had to call a friend of mine, and he had to give me a lawyer lesson. And I was trying to learn from my lawyer lesson friend, but I'm not sure I've got it quite right, but I've got it really close. So y'all just going to kind of walk with me through this, all right? So you make a contract with people. And when you make a contract with people, you say, I will do this if you will do this. And when we make that kind of contract, if one side breaks the contract, then the contract is null and void. The contract doesn't stand anymore. And so if you look at it from God in the covenant and contractual kind of love, you know, if you looked at Hosea, so Hosea goes to marry Gomer, right? And she leaves him after the birth of 3 children. Evidently, she's living with someone else. Contractually, does he have a right to divorce her? He just put her away. Yeah, contractually he could because there was a contract, and she broke that part of the contract. And so justice demands consequences when we break a contract. So if I make a contract with you, and I don't know what the contract will be, we'll just, you know, you can make one up in your head, right? So we got a contract. And so if I do my part of the contract, I'll give you a good one, all right? I did not mean to go here anywhere in this sermon. This just popped right in my mind, just boom, right there. Elders will, I hope they remember this the way I remember it. If not, I'll apologize later. So I came to Clarksville Highway, and one of the things I did at Clarksville Highway when I came in, when I first started 20 years ago, is I had a contract. And I had a contract that we were going to sign. I brought a contract in. It was all written out. And one of your elders, I'm not going to tell you which one, he came to me and he said, y'all will guess who this one was. He said, we never had a contract before. And I said, no, sir. He said, you don't think we'll do what we said we'll do? So I believe very much you'll do what you said you'll do. You're not going to do what you said you were going to do? No, I'm pretty confident I can do what I said I'm going to do. I don't understand why we need a contract. I said, well, we don't need a contract for me or you. We need a contract for the Internal Revenue Service. That's why we need a contract. And he said, well, we never had a contract with one before. And I said, well, I understand that, but it hadn't been done right before. So we need a contract. So we got it all worked out, a contract. But the contract says that you're going to pay me X number of dollars, and this is the way you're going to pay me if I do X number of things. And that's the contract. Now, the contract doesn't list out specifically what I'm supposed to do. It does list out specifically what you're going to pay for. But when you look at that, if I were to break my contract, what would happen? What happens if I break my part of the contract? Let's just hypothetically, let's just think that, okay, Greg's counting this thing down, and he's thinking he's got X number of years to retirement. So what he's decided to do, he's just not going to come to work until he comes to work long enough to y'all fire him. So he's not going to keep up with his contract anymore. Don't call me during the day. I'm done. What would happen if next Sunday I didn't show up to preach, I didn't show up to do my class, didn't go make any visits, didn't call on anybody, didn't check on anybody, sat home, watched Westerns, ate chili. Don't like bonbons. And don't like Oprah, so I watch chili, watch Westerns. Now, if I did that 2 or 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, what do you think would probably happen? Probably wouldn't have a job. Right, you're right. Probably wouldn't have a job. Because I broke my part of the agreement. That's the way contractual logic usually works. You do this and I do this, and if either one of you breaks it, then we can break the agreement. There's some covenant and contract in God's law, but there's also covenant logic. And when covenant logic legally works, covenant logic, it doesn't depend on what I do at all. Let me give you an example. Diane and I don't know if she remembers this. It's way back in Cheap Hill days. There was a piece of property that we looked at over by the boys' ranch that we kind of thought about maybe buying or looking at, and Dad and Uncle Tony came over, looked at it. I don't know if you remember all of that, but that was way back in the day. But there was a covenant in the contract. And one of the covenants in the contract said, you can't tear down the barn. had this old barn on it, and there was a cemetery on it, and the covenant of the contracts was you couldn't tear down the barn, and you couldn't disturb the cemetery in any way. And those were covenants. Now, it didn't matter if I bought it or somebody else bought it, that covenant was still going to be true. If that thing has gone through 15 owners between now and then, guess what? That covenant is still true. You still can't tear down the barn. You still can't destroy the cemetery. Now, I don't know what happened if the barn had burned down. That's kind of what I was thinking. But those were the covenants of the contract. God operates off of a covenant. He made a covenant with us. So when we're unfaithful, when we go off and chase something else, when we find another husband, does God stop loving us? No. Doesn't mean there might not be discipline. Doesn't mean there might not be consequences. But God doesn't stop loving you. He doesn't jump back and forth between love and hate. He works off of a covenant. When we get married, we think about covenants, don't we? We think about covenants. I think we should think about them as covenants more than we think about them as contracts. Now, I know there's some contractual elements in it, but maybe we should think about them as covenants. What if? Notice I said, what if? This is hypothetical. What if I loved my wife in a way that I didn't expect anything from her? The only thing I expected was for me to love her. What if I had a covenant relationship? Well, what if she burned your dinner? I still love her. She don't burn dinner, by the way. She's a good cook. What if she does? Doesn't matter. What if she doesn't? Doesn't matter. It's a covenant relationship. If it's a contractual relationship, I'm always saying, you do your part and I'll do my part, and you do this and I'll do that. You take care of this and I'll take care. If I do this, I expect that. Then we have a contractual relationship, and if she breaks that part of the contract, I think, okay, I can get rid of you because you broke the contract. But what if it's not contract? What if it's more covenant? The way that God works by covenant. So God comes along, and he's got this picture of Gomer, and he's got this picture of Hosea. And he says this in chapter 2. I will betroth you to me forever, and I will betroth you in righteousness and justice and love and compassion. I will betroth you in faithfulness, and you will acknowledge the Lord. Now, here's the interesting thing. He's using Hosea and Gomer as his picture, but they're already married. So if you're already married to somebody, how do you betroth somebody? Because what does betrothed mean? We're going to get engaged. We're going to get engaged, and then I'm going to marry you. So what's the difference? What God is trying to say in Hosea's chapter 2 is, look, I'm going to do something completely different. We're not going to have the same kind of relationship we had before. We're not going to do that type of thing. We're going to make this new covenant relationship. And when I'm going to betroth you in righteousness and justice and love, compassion, faithfulness, and you will acknowledge the Lord. And that's not the faithfulness of you. That's in God's faithfulness is the reason he's doing that. He's doing it because of who he is. Because you're not being faithful at all. So then we have this verse we really throw out at weddings. If you've been to very many weddings, you've probably always heard Ephesians chapter 5, haven't you? Boy, preachers are good. I mean, we are really good at using Ephesians chapter 5 in weddings. You'll hear it almost in every wedding that I do. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, and just Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated his own body, but he feeds and cares for it, just as Christ does the church, for we are members of his body. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. Now, before I read the next section, just stop. Because we read that and we think, boy, Paul has decided he's going to go to Ephesians chapter 5 and he is going to tell us about husbands and wives, and he's going to lay all that out for us, and he's really most concerned with husbands and wives. Here's the kicker. Husbands and wives aren't the point. Husbands and wives are the illustration. The husband and wife part is the illustration of how things are supposed to work, because he says this is a profound mystery. But I am talking about Christ and the church. However, each one of you must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. Did you catch that? I'm talking about a profound mystery, but I am talking about Christ and the church. Marriage is the illustration to help us understand how much Christ loves the church. It's not the other way around. It's not like he throws the husband and wife stuff out and then says, well, it's kind of like Christ and the church, the husband and wife thing. No, Christ and the church is the point of the passage. So it's kind of this critical phrase that's in there. So here's what you're supposed to take from that. Christ pursues us the same way Hosea pursued an unfaithful wife. And that's what Christ does for you. So it goes deeper than just the thought process of that. Every one of us in our relation to Christ becomes an illustration of the covenant relationship that God has with his people. When you get to the book of Revelation and he's picturing Christ in the church, what does he call it? What does Christ come back to get? His bride. His bride. That's what the church is. So it's about that covenant relationship that we have with one another. So in Christ, this is what we figure out. We are both Gomer and the church, and the unfaithful spouse and the beloved bride. We're both of those things at exactly the same time. So are there times in your life you're the Gomer? You run off? You go after something else? Your allegiance is divided. You don't remain true to the one that you have committed your life to and the one that you've made a covenant with. God says sometimes you're like that. Even in calling us into the church, remember when in Corinthians, when Paul is talking about that, and he lists all of these really, really, really bad people, they're this, and boy, it's a really good category of really, really bad kind of things you would do. Do you remember what he says immediately after that? And such were some of you. That's what you were like. So those of you who are in the church, those of you who are in the body, all of those things that we're not supposed to be, that's what you were before you became in your covenant relationship with Christ. So you've been the Gomer, and you might be in some ways, again, if you take that allegiance and put it somewhere else. But we're also the beloved bride. We're the one that God pursues continually. Constantly. He's the one that even in our unfaithfulness, he still loves us. And can you imagine Hosea? I tried to put myself in Hosea's shoes this week, and I started thinking, if I started to get that message from God, what would that sound like? So God shows up and he says, Greg, listen, I need you to go marry a prostitute and then have children so people know that it's unfaithful. Like, really? Can't you figure out another way to do this? Do I really need to go through the heartbreak of that? So the heartbreak of, you don't see probably a lot of the things in the text that maybe would have happened. So Hosea wakes up in the middle of the night and Gomer's gone and he thinks, where'd she go this time? Or she doesn't come home at night and he says, I wonder who she was with last night. And in our logic, we say, man, you just get rid of her. And God looks at Hosea and he says, no, don't get rid of her. I want you to go find her. And even though she's already your wife, I want you to buy her back. I want you to go and spend money and buy her back and bring her back home. And he's like, what? Really? That's what you want me to do? And he does. He goes and finds her. He buys her back. He brings her back home. God goes to Abraham and he calls the people. He says, if you be my people, I'll love you. I'll care for you. I'll make you a great nation. All you have to do is trust in me. But they don't. They don't trust in him, then they don't trust in him. They don't trust in him. He sends a prophet. They don't trust him. And he sends another prophet. They don't trust in him. He sends another message. They don't trust in him. All they do is they keep running after something else when God says the thing that you're running after is not any good for you. And we sit in the Old Testament and we look and say, those crazy people right there, if they had just paid attention, they'd have been a lot better off, wouldn't they? And then God says, you're going to be unfaithful, but I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to buy you back. I'm going to pay the ransom. I'm going to come get you. So he sends Jesus, who dies on the cross, that buys them back, and still some of them refuse to be unfaithful. And we read that Old Testament with a callousness and say, man, we'd never be like that. And then we fast forward into the 21st century, and here we are. We're sitting here. God has formed a covenant with us. He has bought us back. He has married us. He's made us his bride. He's picked us over everybody. And then, instead of being faithful to our husband, if we're not careful, just like the Israelites of the Old Testament, we go run after all of these things that are going to bring us happiness and success, and it's going to just be wonderful if we have them. And we become so fascinated with all of those things that we become unfaithful to our husband, and we are just like Gomer. We're off chasing other things that are just going to destroy us and never going to love us for who we are, just for what we can bring to the table. And so we find ourselves in the same spot. And the question is really simple. What do we choose? What do you choose? Now, this is going to sound really harsh, and I don't mean it to sound as harsh as it's going to sound, but I was talking to Shaw about this morning. I said, text is text, and you just have to be faithful to the text, and I try not to run from it. So I try to say it just the way the text says it. And the only way I know to say it, to illustrate this and bring the point home, is just this way. Are you going to be the faithful spouse, or are you going to be the prostitute? Which one are you going to be? Which one are you going to be? What are you going to do with your choice? God is sitting there saying, I will love you. I will care for you. Be the best husband you can ever imagine if you'll just stay in your relationship with me. Will we stay there? Or will we look out there and say, well, I know he's a pretty good husband, but I bet there's something better. I bet I can find somebody who does this. I bet I can find something that does this. I bet I can find something that fills this need. I bet I don't have to stay faithful to that one. I bet I can go find somebody else who's better. And I just ask you, who are you going to find that's better? Who are you going to find?